Welcome to Engage ICT, Democracy on Tap. Yay! I want to start tonight just by thanking our partners and sponsors, the people that have helped make this event possible. First, the Crown Uptown for this amazing venue. Let's have a round of applause. Also, a great big thanks to Tanya's Soup Kitchen for the wonderful appetizers. As always, a big shout out to the Wichita Public Library for the further reading and resource guides. Those are wonderful resources. And we do have the past months of Engage ICT topics up there. So if you missed an event and you were interested in it, check that out. Those are really cool resources. So thanks to the Public Library as well. Lastly, a big thank you to Digital Brand. They are videotaping our event tonight. Often we Facebook Live our Engage ICT events, but Digital Brand is going to do a really fine job for us, and we will have the event posted in a few days to engageict.org. So huge thank you to Digital Brand for doing us right here tonight. Also, 1A will be taking the event tonight and creating a radio show that they will be airing on 1A in a few weeks. So that's very exciting as well. Yes, go ahead. Join us next month. Be sure to come to our Engage ICT Democracy on Tap on Tuesday, November 5th. We'll be back at Roxy's downtown, and we'll be discussing mental health. That will be a really interesting conversation. We actually have Sheriff Easter and Chief Ramsey on the panel. More to be announced, but that will be a really good conversation. Please come out for that. And in the meantime, as always, you can check out past events, videos, and podcasts on engageict.org. So please do that. We do, of course, have a very special guest host tonight. We are so proud to be a part of 1A's Across America project. 1A Across America is a 2-year collaborative to incorporate more local and regional viewpoints into the national conversation. Leading up to the 2020 general election, 1A's production team is working with 6 public media stations that are deeply rooted in their communities to bring each region's issues and concerns to 1A's national audience. KMUW was chosen as one of those stations, and that's why Joshua Johnson is here tonight. So we're thrilled that we were chosen. Joshua Johnson, our guest moderator tonight, hosts 1A, and he is one of the most important, daily conversations in America. The program is a production of WAMU in Washington, D.C., and distributed by NPR. Joshua began his public radio career helping launch a regional news partnership between Miami's NPR station and the Miami Herald. He served for over 5 years as morning news host for KQED in San Francisco, and then before joining WAMU, Joshua co-created and hosted the nationwide public radio series Truth Be Told, which explored race in America. It's my honor to welcome Joshua Johnson to the stage.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Oh, you can do better than that, Wichita. Good evening. Thank you so much for making time for us. It's nice. I love this theater. We've never done an event like this with a bar. Yeah, so you don't woo too much. This is public radio. We have to keep it very civilized and intellectual. If that was true, we wouldn't have, there is actual alcohol? I don't drink, so I'm like, is there actual alcohol back there? So this is gonna be a really good show. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Joshua Johnson. I am the host of 1A, and I bring you greetings from WAMU 88.5, a service of American University in Washington, and from NPR. We're so glad that you decided to take time out during the week out of your schedules for something that we consider very important and that we hope will be important to our listeners as well. We've had a number of these conversations around the country, and so far, we're kind of batting 1,000 in terms of the quality of the conversations. We have learned that when we go across the country and when we give everyday people a chance to be heard nationwide and to lead these conversations, not once, and I mean not once in my entire time hosting this show, not once has one of these conversations devolved into yelling and screaming and cussing and fussing. It's amazing how good the American people are, coast to coast, at having civil dialogue, and we're going to prove that again tonight. So thank you for coming. Want to dive into the program quickly. We got a few quick rules of the road and some production notes for you. We will be recording this again for radio broadcast. We'll be videotaping it for our website, the1a.org. Everything we discussed tonight could end up being on the air. Do bear that in mind as you make your comments. We will be editing this program down, but just remember that this entire event is on the record and may be used for part of a national broadcast. We would like you to be part of the conversation by using these comment cards. First of all, does everyone have a card? Is there anyone who did not get one of these cards? Everybody got one? If you did not get one, raise your hand. Keep them held up very high. All right, while you keep your hands up high, we want you to use these comment cards to be part of the conversation. You'll see there's a space for your name, your city, your email address. You can opt as to whether or not you want to read your question at the mic. It does not make a difference whether you want to read them live or not in terms of whether we will add your question to the conversation. If you just want me to read your question or comment, just check no, and then we'll filter them through. Amanda, our producer, will curate them, and she'll send the best ones to me on my laptop. Please write legibly. If we cannot read it, I will not say it. Got it? And the nice thing is, if you write legibly, that'll make us believe that you really took your time to think about what you wrote and did it very, diplomatically and thoughtfully, as opposed to like scribbling it like a ransom note. So please, keep it legible. Keep it legible for poor Amanda's sake. Once you have a comment that you're ready to throw in for consideration, you can raise that card up, and one of our staffers, Asha, Vanessa, and Heather, I'm not sure exactly where they are. I think they're working their way around, but they will come and pick up those cards and send them over to Amanda. Again, please do write as legibly as you can. I probably don't need to say this, and I've alluded to this already, but of course this is about civil dialogue. We want to make sure that you have the freedom to speak your mind. We know that we go across the country and talk about some very intense issues, and we don't want you to have to bite your tongue so much that you can't say what you're thinking. We want to keep it civil, but we want you to be honest, speak freely, be candid, share your story. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment or a personal account of what we're dealing with. One of the things that plays very negatively on the radio is negative energy. It's amazing when it's that intimate, when it's in your ear, how it feels like it's in your house or in your car. It's like right next to you. Now, if you hear something you like, feel free to applaud. We don't need you to be silent. If you hear something funny, you can laugh. We don't need this to be grim. But if you hear something you disagree with, use the comment cards to get involved in the conversation. Challenge it, question it, ask a question, give a remark, and you can note on the card who your question or comment is directed to. But if this conversation were to devolve into negativity and booing and heckling, the nation will turn the show off. And there's nothing I can do to make them turn it back on. I am a big believer in personal responsibility. And it is your responsibility to make sure that America wants to hear what you have to say. I will do my best to moderate this conversation, but if you turn America off, none of them will hear any of what any of you have to say, and it will not be our fault. The responsibility is on you now, so please, no booing, no hissing, no heckling. That is my rule. Agreed? All right. With that said, sermon over. Getting myself together. By the way, how many of you are regular listeners to 1A? How many of you? How many of you are members of KMUW? Thank you so much. How many of you have no idea what the show is or who I am and someone dragged you here? They're like, you need to go see Josh. Like, how many of you, anybody? Is there anybody here who has no idea? Okay, thank you. One, thank you for being honest. Anyone else who has no idea what they're doing there? Okay, she won't admit it, but okay, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry to do this to you. Well, thank you for making time for us. We do hope that you'll check out 1A on KMUW and stay in touch with us online at the1a.org. We have a wonderful panel this evening. We're just about ready to dive into it. Let me just get all my papers together and my script. And again, it means the world to us that you make time to support this station, to be part of a civil dialogue, and to prove to the American people just how good we still are and how much goodness we still have when it comes to having tough conversations. Someone across the country, depending on what happens tonight, is going to be renewed in their faith in civil dialogue because of what you do tonight. So thank you. This is very important to us. We really do appreciate it. All right, got my script, I got my questions. Amanda, we ready? All right, so we're going to begin with a little bit of applause. Then I'll introduce the guests, and away you go. Ready? This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson here in Wichita, Kansas, hosting a special edition of KMUW's Engage ICT, Democracy on Tap. Today we're talking about women in politics. By a show of hands, how many of you believe that women are underrepresented in elected office? Quite a lot, pretty much everybody in the room. Understandable. The statistics would certainly bear that out. Women hold less than a quarter of the seats in Congress, just over a quarter of the nation's state legislative seats. Here in Kansas, it's 28%, though the state does have one of the nation's 9 female governors, Laura Kelly, who is a Democrat. One commonality, and Laura Kelly is a lot like many of the women elected at all levels of government in that she is a Democrat. Most of the elected women in this country are, most female voters are as well, and we want to dig into why that is, why the Republican Party has not had as much success as Democrats have had in electing women to office, and might that change in 2020 and beyond? We're here as part of our collaboration 1A Across America, and we're focused on hearing from you. We've teamed up with 6 stations, including KMUW, to stay tuned into what you're thinking when it comes to election issues. And tonight, we want to hear from Kansans about electing women to office. Joining us here on stage is Jennifer Basinger, the Vice President of Political Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. She focuses on recruiting Republican women to run for office and supporting their campaigns. Jennifer, welcome to 1A.
Thanks for having me.
Next to her. Next to Jennifer is Jim McLean, the Senior Political Reporter for the Kansas News Service. Jim, welcome. Next to Jim is Senator Barbara Bollier, a Democrat for District 7, which is in the Kansas City metro area. She was elected as a Republican and switched to the Democratic Party last fall. Senator Bollier, glad to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And we also have Representative Christy Williams, a Republican representing District 77, which is just east of Wichita, where we are now. Representative Williams, welcome to the program. Glad we got a lively crowd, and we want to hear from you here in the theater throughout the conversation. We want your questions about the Republican Party's relationship with women as voters or as candidates. If you are a woman who is a GOP voter or maybe works with the GOP politically or governmentally, we'd love to hear from you. What do you like about what the party's doing? What do you wish would change? Do you think it's on the right track? And tell us why. Write your questions and thoughts on that comment card. Hold it up when you're ready for us to throw it in for consideration, and we'll get to comments momentarily. Let me begin with your stories, Senator Bollier and Representative Williams. Senator, you've been reelected a number of times over the last decade as a Republican. What made you decide to change parties?
Josh, I am about taking care of people. I'm a doctor, and I've always been about looking at issues and listening to patients, finding out what's wrong, finding out what we need to discuss, assessing the situation, and then moving forward and producing results. And when I realized that I couldn't accomplish those things as a Republican, and there were numerous things that went on that caused that, but when I found out that that voice of reason, that moderate thought process wasn't welcome, it was time to move. And I have been very welcomed into the Democratic Party.
Was there any one thing in particular that you felt you could not do that kind of put you over the top in terms of making that decision? Was there a last straw?
There were issues that arose that had to do with honoring all people of all choices in their lives, and the Republican Party took a stand that I was not comfortable with. But as far as one specific issue, there were many, and a lot of it had to do with just the inability to talk together, to always be partisan, watching what was Sam Brownback's horrible tax experiment, and working so hard to change that. I came from a district that, as a Republican, did not support that, and we kept going down these paths of not supporting public education, and that just wasn't working.
How would you define your politics, Senator? Conservative, moderate, progressive? What terms would you use to describe yourself?
I have always described myself as a moderate, but I always let people know you have to look at each issue individually. So it's kind of like I'm a mutt. I'm an independent thought person. I always have stood up for my constituents, put person over party. So that, it depends on the issue, but moderate would be my definition.
Representative Williams, same question. How would you define your politics? Conservative, moderate, progressive, the issues that are most important to you? How would you describe yourself?
I would say that in the last 5 years in the legislature, having come from the city position as mayor and a teacher prior to that, and a mom of 4, I've actually become more conservative during my time in the legislature for a whole host of reasons.
Now, before being elected to the House, you kind of alluded to this. You were the mayor of Augusta, Kansas,
Yes.
the first woman to be mayor
Yeah.
in that city's history. What? That's worth a woo. You gonna woo? There you go. Right. Nothing wrong with a little woo. What made you decide to get involved in politics in the first place? Was there any particular moment or happening that kind of made you decide that you needed to jump in?
First of all, I have always loved the debate and to be able to share ideas and to be able to work towards actual solutions. So that's always been exciting to me. But if I put that aside and you think about just rolling your hands up and getting involved in your community, that's how it started for me. And I think that's why I'm a conservative, and I consider myself a conservative, because when we needed, for example, a playground in my hometown, I didn't ask the city to do it. I went out and gathered people together and went and got donations and worked really, really hard to make that a reality. The same thing happened again a few years later when our downtown was really struggling. I felt like, you know what? I'm not going to ask the city to step up. We don't have that kind of money, but I think that I can rally the troops. So we did it again, and that was a success. And then, lo and behold, that led to people wanting me to run for mayor.
And I just want to be clear, Representative, you said that you've become more conservative as
Yes.
time has gone on. Do you think that that's in terms of a crystallization of the beliefs you already had, or did you find yourself actually being pulled further to the right on the political spectrum? Could you just clarify that a bit?
I think that everybody, when they step into politics, it's a little bit different when you have to push that button, which is red for no or green for yes, and you have to make that decision, and you have to consider the voters that you serve and make sure you're reflecting the value set that you're honoring that community. So that's number one. But number two, I think that I did have a set of values that put family as priority, that believes that the individual is empowered when we give them space to achieve. And the more I saw programs, expansions, more government, more money, but I didn't see with requests for more money, let's just say for education, I didn't hear, well, this is how we're going to improve success. If I could see some results, I want the dollars to move in that direction. If it's criminal justice reform and we want to lower recidivism rates, I want to do that. That is invested taxes. But what I saw was that we were putting more money and more money into program after program, watching caseloads go up, test scores go down, and we weren't seeing the results, we weren't seeing the accountability, and we saw it across the spectrum, in the private sector with economic development incentives, to the public sector, and I just said, enough. Let's empower individuals to make good decisions, get out of their way, and allow businesses and families to make decisions that are best for them.
Before we zoom out and look at Kansas more broadly, Senator Bollier, same question, what got you into politics?
I started always as a public servant by serving in my community. I have over 50 years in where I live and have always volunteered. And that led when I stopped practicing medicine and realized that there needed to be voices at the table as we struggled with health care, people not being able to pay the bills for health care, people not having access to it. I knew that we needed voices at the table from someone like me who was very well educated and had practiced medicine. And so I became involved. And could I respond? Please. I said I think it's fascinating that this idea of conservatism is about family. I truly value family, and I consider that a moderate position. So I'm a little confused, honestly. And I also wanted to address this issue of, I totally agree that I think people should be able to make their own decisions, and that's why I support things like women having access to contraception. I think they should have that choice. So I'd love to, I'm struggling to understand where that is, that conservative versus moderate.
I do want to get more into some of the specific issues in just a minute, but first, Jim McLean, can we zoom out just a little bit for the benefit of people around the country who are not so steeped in Kansas politics? Can you just give us the 30,000-foot view of the landscape for women in politics here in Kansas?
Happy to. Listen, Kansas, for many, many, many decades, was considered nationally as kind of a bellwether state and was considered, you know, a rock-solid Republican state, yet it was very progressive and led the way historically in regard to suffrage and a lot of issues like that. And you know, we look back at Nancy Kassebaum, who's a United States Senator, when there weren't that many women in the U.S. Senate. And so Kansas has always, I think, been at the forefront of that trend nationally. And what's happening now in Kansas for the nation's benefit, the same trends that we're seeing nationwide, the widening gender and the widening education gap, are pronounced here in Kansas, but not across the board. Joshua, that's what you need to understand about Kansas. Laura Kelly won the governor's race by carrying 10 counties out of 105, okay? And because Kansas, like many plain states, there are huge expanses of rural Kansas that are literally emptying out, and they're losing political power as that happens. And so Governor Kelly won Johnson County, which is the Kansas City suburbs, won the university communities in the state, and carried Sedgwick County down here, which is, again, the state's largest city. And that was enough then to propel her into the governor's office. And so I think what we're seeing here in Kansas is what we're seeing nationwide, the gender gap, the education gap, and as you said at the top of the show, women are highly valued in the Democratic Party politically. There's actually a benefit to being a woman when you put yourself on the ballot in a Democratic primary, contrary to what happens oftentimes in the Republican primary, where women sometimes have to run against, in a technical political term, run against their gender to be successful. So that's the dynamic we see happening here, maybe a little less pronounced than in some urban areas across the country, but still present. That's
a good place to bring in Jennifer Basinger in terms of your efforts to get more Republican women involved in politics. How do you see the problem in the first place? Why there aren't more Republican women running for office? Are there a few places where you try to attack the problem most acutely, or is it more diffuse than that?
Well, I think it's important to, first of all, say, generally speaking, and I hate to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway, conservatives, especially Republicans in general, don't really buy into the whole identity politics thing. So we just want the best candidate. When I go out and recruit in a particular district, I want the candidate who's going to win. I don't care if it's a woman or a man. Now, sometimes the data will drive me toward the woman, and it will make sense for whatever reason in a particular district to recruit a woman. But at the end of the day, I just don't care if it's a man or a woman, and I think that's what you'll hear from my fellow Republicans as well.
Talk about some of the things that you do to try and recruit women to run, to get them elected, particularly when you run across a woman who you think could be a good candidate, but maybe she's not sure if it's for her.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times you'll see women come up through the grassroots in Kansas. They will find it comfortable to start by volunteering for someone's campaign. And then maybe they'll move into a leadership role at a local organization. I think getting them comfortable with the process is part of it. Because again, Christy alluded to this earlier, sometimes in conservative circles especially, it's the traditional roles. Mom stays home, and on the Democratic side, we see government is sometimes the answer, or government programs are the answer, and so serving in public office is much more accepted and even encouraged than we would see on the Republican side for some folks, especially those super conservative, traditional rural folks. So helping them get past that and saying, it's good, it's okay, come be a voice for the other soccer moms in your community or the ladies at your church or whatever, bring that knowledge to Topeka, let's help you get elected.
Beyond some of the pre-existing preconceptions about who belongs in office, are there any things that you wish more women understood about just the process of running for office that might ease their concerns, answer their big questions? Like, do you find yourself dispelling one or two particular myths all the time?
That's a great question. I suppose just that first and foremost, that it's okay to run, that if you do hold on to some of those ultra-conservative values, that it's kind of a man's world, heaven forbid, let's get past that. And then also there is, polling confirms this, there's this idea that they'll be attacked by the media. And I printed out some poll results that were so intriguing to me, that there's this perception that their family will be attacked, or that there'll be this negative piece when they go out and run. And so we have to help them understand that that's just not likely going to be the case. Maybe on the national scene we'll see that, but here in Kansas that's probably just not going to be the case.
We're going to get into some questions and comments from the audience. Jennifer S. is here in the audience. You have a question about working across the aisle. Jennifer, the microphone is right down here, down center. You can see one of our KMUW staffers raising their hand. If you would make your way to the mic, I'll get to you in just 1 second, but let me first get to a comment that was left on 1A's Facebook page. And Representative Williams, I'd like you to take this one on, and we'll split it in a few parts. Adrienne wrote on our Facebook page, currently the GOP female representation dropped dramatically during the midterms. How do they want the GOP to better support them? How do Republican candidates plan on winning back the women, especially millennials, who are leaving the party? Let's break that question into a few pieces, Representative Williams. First of all, thoughts on how the Republican Party might better support you, if you agree that they do need to support you better all. How do you see it?
I think that there's absolutely room for improvement. I think women have a tough position because they are generally the ones that want to be the nurturers of the kids. I have 4, and it's very hard to take a position like running to Topeka, which is 2 hours away, and maintaining that balance in your life. But supporting us would be that oftentimes women have to balance being a likable leader more than men do, and it's more difficult whether you're on the right or the left to maintain that likability and that strong leadership. And so the Republican Party could do a great service to myself and other Republican women by remembering that it's okay to give us an extra encouragement, support, whatever it may be. And though I agree with Jennifer, we want the best person to run for that office, I also would say that women's voice is a little bit different. And at the State House, having just a little bit more than 28% would be a good thing, because we bring a different perspective to the State House, and we're great multitaskers.
Can you elaborate on that a bit? I'm glad you brought that up, Representative Williams, in terms of women having to deal more with likability. That makes me crazy sometimes talking politics, because you don't hear male candidates have to, I mean, it's like, you could buy a beer with him is as far as it goes. Women have to answer this question way more, and it's weird for me, but for you as a candidate, how do you see that from the inside? Like, where does that come from?
I just want to tell you that for the most part, we don't think about it. We just live, we do our lives. We're at peace with the world as it is because we like being women, right? But I will say we get it on both sides. I keep saying as a mom, there are those that think, why are you doing that? Why would you leave them to do that? And then there's the other side that, you know what? Maybe you are too confident. Maybe you're too aggressive. Maybe you should let somebody else handle that issue. And I think that studies and polling does indicate that men can get a more favorable rating without having the experience. Women do have to, according to surveys, work a little bit harder and have a little bit better background than the guys often do. And I don't let that wear me down, but it does happen. So
interesting you brought that up. Melanie writes, I am a strong, smart, caring person. I'd be a great leader, or more specifically, an elected official. But I am a passionate woman. I show my feelings, and this renders me unelectable in Kansas. A male version of me would be mayor in a heartbeat. Senator Bollier, before I get to Jennifer's question, Senator, is there anything that the GOP might have done to keep you in its ranks? Was there anything that they could have reached out to you with, addressed for you, or was your mind kind of made up once the decision was made?
I grew up a moderate Republican. Nancy Kassebaum was my hero and continues to be.
Tell us about her. Who was that?
And Nancy Kassebaum was the first woman elected in her own right to the U.S. Senate and was from Kansas. She was my mother's college friend, and I grew up watching other women work diligently to get a woman elected to the U.S. Senate, and I am proud to be able to be from that state. What could the GOP have done differently over time? Let's start with giving me support. When I endorsed across party lines, a statement was made from the Republican Party, we're never going to give her another cent. They never gave me a single cent. Now, it's interesting to hear from you that you're trying to support from the Republican Party the woman who would be the best candidate. That was not true in my district and in my experience. So maybe, hopefully that will change, because that is what it takes. It takes recognizing what women are advocating for, and especially the not being partisan. And both parties can be that way. I'm not going to say anyone isn't, but at least in the Kansas situation for me, it's been much more supportive for me as a woman, me as just a person in office representing my constituents.
Let me hear from Jennifer here on the stage, Jim, and then we'll get to Jennifer in the audience. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, the Kansas Chamber is not a partisan organization, so it's hard to sit here with my Kansas Chamber hat on and talk GOP politics. I came up through the grassroots world. I say this at staff meetings all the time, I would love to endorse a Democrat. Give me one that can hit 60-70% of our voter scorecard, and I just haven't been able to find that person. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't do it. I work in criminal justice reform, cross-party lines all the time. I see fabulous, fabulous people serving on both sides of the aisle. So I do want to clarify, the Kansas Chamber is not partisan.
Jim?
Yeah, just for the national audience, I mean, Senator Bollier here is a perfect example of some of the dynamics that are occurring. Johnson County, Kansas City suburbs, right? And Johnson County is the economic engine of the state, most populous county in the state, and for many, many years, decades, it was controlled by moderate Republicans. And that has changed fairly substantially, and like all kinds of changes, it builds gradually, and then when it happens, it really happens, right? And so moderate Republicans really had controlled Johnson County for a very long time, as I said, and they didn't see it coming that when they actually got to the point where they would resent Democrats being on the ballot because they thought it was essentially their birthright to some extent to occupy those seats. Not Barbara maybe, but But then I think, the point I'm trying to make is I think Barbara really put herself in a better position politically by changing parties than if she continued to try to persevere as a moderate Republican in Johnson County. And one other thing to say about that, the 3 women who are running in the Republican primary in the 3rd Congressional District, which is essentially Johnson and Wyandotte County, all women. Challenging Sharice Davids, the Democrat who took a seat from a Republican, Kevin Yoder, a couple of years ago.
Let's get to Jennifer in the audience, and then we'll keep going with the panel. Jennifer, what's on your mind?
Hello. Thank you, 1A and Joshua Johnson, for choosing KMUW for your Across America project. We're so grateful. My question is to Senator Bollier and Representative Williams. What are some of the best, if any, ways you've found to collaborate with civility with those with opposing viewpoints in the Kansas legislature?
Representative, why don't you take that one first? How do you work across the aisle?
I would love to. I think it's a lot of fun to work with my friends across the aisle. And behind the scenes, I think you would be probably encouraged to see the good camaraderie that actually exists. But for me personally, last year, there was across the aisle support for economic development tax incentive reform. And we were successful getting that passed. Had friends across the aisle that were incredibly helpful making that happen. And then Governor Kelly signed it into law. And I could give you a host of examples of bills that we have passed where we teamed it up and worked together. And it is more fun for me if we can find some of those common grounds. We will not on all issues because I'm pretty conservative on fiscal issues especially. But for those places we can find common ground, I really enjoy it.
Senator?
Totally agree. One of the most important things that I learned from day one, and I was elected and had 5 days to get ready. I was in a special election, so it was go. And the first thing I knew to do was listen. And that means listen and learn people's names and get to know each other as human beings. So working across the aisle, it depends on what aisle you're talking about. It's not just Republican or Democrat. Sometimes it's Republican and Republican. Sometimes it's urban and rural. Sometimes it's male and female, whatever it may be. So the point is, as humans and as people who want to collaborate and work for the good of the people, getting together, talking through, as Christy said, finding common ground and moving forward together, we can get things done, and I love it when that happens.
And what you all don't know is before we came out here, these two were about at each other's throats over something relating to education, and then immediately
nicely.
Nicely, absolutely, just passionate about it. And I go back to Melanie's comment online, bring that passion. Passion's not what's going to keep you out of the legislature.
Well, but also backstage, you two were hanging out, having a good, just having like sister talk. I barely could get in the middle of the conversation to say, we're doing the show now, it's 5 minutes to stay. Like, you two actually, you know each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. We have to talk to each other. How could we ever settle anything or go anywhere if we don't talk to each other? So no, it's my pleasure to work with Barbara.
Jim, could I get your sense of this working across the aisle here?
Well, I was just going to say, it's really kind of a Kansas phenomenon. I'm sure it exists in other small states. We call it the 1 degree of separation. You can be in any town in Kansas and you meet somebody, and often you know somebody in common. It's just a very strange thing. And then that was the conversation. They both had common interests in terms of where they went to school and who they knew at KU and that kind of thing. And really, Barbara said it, those are the kinds of things that bridge partisan divides when you get to know one another's people. I will say, all the Pollyanna talk up here, I've covered the State House for 39 years, and we're coming into a better time, but in the final years of the Brownback administration, that place was as ideologically polarized as I have ever seen it.
I want to get to the other part of Adrian's question, Jennifer, and I'd like you to answer this. In terms of the strategy for millennials who may be leaving the GOP, is there a strategy to try to bring them back, and what does that look like?
I'm so glad that you asked that specific question. I sat in a conference recently where Kristen Soltis Anderson spoke, and she shared some polling from Echelon Insights and talked about that very specific thing. Sometimes we hear that millennials prefer socialism over capitalism. And that we just find that shocking that that could be. And so she talked about what happens when they really break down what those different things mean, what socialism really means and what capitalism really means. And at the end of the day, that's not necessarily the case. They do believe in many of those same core values that we on the Republican side believe in, but they're not going to bend on a few things like income inequality and health care. And so, again, we have to have conversations. We can't just assume we've lost an entire segment of the population. We've got to go where they're at, talk to them, have conversation, embrace them and get to know them, and listen, Barbara, right, like you said, listen.
I think if there's one thing I've noticed, Jennifer, but we've covered CPAC for 2 years in a row now, and at both events, the vast majority of people at CPAC are in their like 20s.
Right.
They're college students.
Right.
Because there's a real concerted effort, particularly, well, not exclusively, but I noticed that in like the very like beating heart of conservative politics in DC, there is a recognition that millennials have got to be a priority for the party, especially
Absolutely.
millennial women. So what you're saying from our reporting is not unique.
No, not at all. And millennial voters are turning out. They are absolutely going to turn out. And if we ignore them, if we just give up on them and assume we know what they're thinking and how they're going to vote, that's on us.
We are speaking to Jennifer Basinger, Vice President of Political Affairs for the Kansas Chamber, Jim McLean, Senior Political Reporter for the Kansas News Service, Senator Barbara Bollier, a Democrat for District 7 in the Kansas City metro area, and Representative Christy Williams, a Republican representing District 77, which is just east of Wichita. I'm Joshua Johnson, and you're listening to 1A. Philip has a question for Jennifer. Actually, before we get to Philip's question, let me get to Brent's question. Brent writes, how can we encourage women who are turned off by partisan politics to engage in political discourse and civic life? Representative Williams, how would you answer that?
I think the best answer is get them involved locally, small first, and work through that. For me, it was volunteering, it was the city, but for somebody else, it might be their PTA, it may be their school board. And once you start doing that, you gain some confidence, some experience, and can jump right into some higher levels you might never have considered before.
It's interesting, Representative, that the things that you mentioned are largely kind of, often in many places, executive nonpartisan offices who just have to kind of get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you're in the PTA or if you're with the school board, like there are budgets you have to pass, there are deadlines you have to meet, and there's no flexibility. You kind of have to work together to get things done.
Absolutely, and that's the truth for municipalities in Kansas. They are also nonpartisan elections.
Senator, how would you answer that?
Totally agree with that. So I will add. The other thing I would add in is and many of us do, we invite people to come visit us. Finding out what goes on in the State House is very eye-opening to people, but it also encourages them to get involved in the process. This is your government. It's not ours as elected officials. It's all of ours. And so when you actually come and see what matters and find out an issue and find out that your voice can make a difference, you can write a letter, you can come and testify, you can just make a phone call to who represents you, whatever it is, when you find that out, then you own part of it and you find your voice and then you can participate as well.
Jim?
Well, I was just curious, I was really intrigued by something I just heard Jennifer say. We ignore millennials at our peril. Obviously, the demographics are such you can't if you want to stay competitive, right, long term.
Absolutely.
So what I'm curious about, it's all about the sales pitch, right? What you have to offer them, right?
Yes.
And so what I'm really curious about is what changes in party orthodoxy do you think it will take to get millennials to come on board with the Republican Party? Because right now they are choosing, and the data shows they're choosing one side versus the other. So I'm just curious, does the party have to change in order to make that happen?
That's a great question.
Well, I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
before you answer,
Yes.
I would also say that many millennials are choosing not to choose either side.
Right.
We should remember that America's electorate is a quarter Democrat, a quarter Republican, and half independent, and has been for decades.
Except I just happen to spend time with a political scientist who I respect. He will tell you there's no such thing as a true independent. Everybody has partisan leanings in such that it's a misnomer to think that there's a huge glop of voters out there who are just kind of weighing both sides and can go either way. That typically isn't the case. But I am really curious, because you're really looking at this seriously, and I want to know how you change the sales pitch to make the Republican Party more attractive to that demographic.
So I have been a delegate at the state level a few different times over the years to the Republican Party, and I have sat through those meetings where we have had the discussion as to whether or not we're going to change the platform. Good grief. There's no alcohol at these events, but there should be, because it just goes on and on and on. And some of our friends in the audience here have been at those same meetings, and there have been times where we have made a change. For instance, the death penalty was part of the Republican Party platform, a pro-death penalty stance. Through the efforts of myself included and some others, we were able to pull that out of the Republican Party platform. That was a huge deal, but to see that little change, it felt huge to me. But to many, it was, oh, okay, well, it's a life issue or it's a cost issue, or we can let that go and fight about other things. Things like that change. You'll never, in my opinion, you'll never see the big things change. So I think finding places where we can make little changes like that, you'll see, but don't expect the big things to change. Again, I said this before, millennials, that younger generation, they overall do embrace capitalism, or at least they prefer that, studies will show, but they're not going to compromise on things like income inequality and health care. So we'll have to find those things where we can find common ground, make little changes as we go along, but it's about those conversations and really making sure we're on the same page.
Julie is here tonight. She has a question about the Republican Party. Julie, would you make your way to the mic? And while she does, let me go back to Philip's question. Philip asks, how do you feel about the argument that elected officials should demographically mirror their constituents? How do you reconcile this with the face of the Republican Party? Kind of a two-part question. Let me ask Representative Williams to grab mostly the second part of that in terms of the demographics of the constituency and the face of the party, although I imagine it's different when you're talking about a state legislative district as opposed to the nation.
Sure. I think that definitely I reflect the demographics of my 77th district. But I would also say it's pretty tough to get people to run for positions. They may have an opinion about something, but they may not be able to, afford to step out of that job, that career, and take a pay loss to come to Topeka or to be a mayor or to do any of those things. It's a true sacrifice. So it doesn't matter if you're looking for a black man or a white female or LGBT. The reality is, it'd be great if they could absolutely reflect the area in which they live, but the truth of the matter is, it's hard to get anyone that can give up the time to commit and to run for elected office.
Senator, before you answer, I should just read, according to the 2018 census estimates, Kansas has a population of about 2.9 million people. The state is, according to the census, just over 86% white, about 6% black, about 12% Hispanic or Latino, about 76% of the state is white, non-Hispanic, non-Latino, and Kansas is almost 50-50 male-female, but the females have a slight edge. It's 50.2% female. Senator?
The things that we need to change are to look at, and looking at that, how do you represent your district? As a moderate Republican, we kind of were our own party. Mm-hmm. And right. So when you talk about across party lines, most of the bipartisan efforts that I've been involved with that include stopping the brownback tax experiment or putting forward enough money to pay the bills for what's in place, it's been a moderate Democrat coalition of people that put the votes together to pass things. It isn't very often, I can't think of a single time, that the Democrats and the conservatives came together and the moderates were out.
It's happened.
So, but not
very often.
Not when I've been in office. But if you're representing the people that elected you, so for me, being able to change parties, more people are of that ilk. But I can't ever just represent. I get people that write me and say, you're not representing me. Well, I have to represent about 80,000 people. So there are going to be a lot of opinions in 80,000. Just come to my house and the difference between my husband and I. Those are differences of opinions. But the idea is to get it in general and to try to understand where they're going. So,
Jennifer?
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. If they elected you, they're probably not going to be terribly surprised at how you voted. And that's what's expected. Our PAC, I run the PAC at the Kansas Chamber as well. When I endorse a candidate and help get them elected, there is a certain expectation that comes along with that as to how they're going to vote. But I know in advance, I really know in advance and know what I'm going to expect. But there are times when they do have to vote their district, and I just have to give them a pass. It's not very often because, again, we know what to expect.
Before we get to Julie's question, Jim, the Brownback tax initiative has come up a few times. Could you just explain for people who don't know or don't remember, what was that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, it was...
Are we having flashbacks out there in the audience? Don't all run for the bar at once.
Yeah.
Explain what the Brownback tax initiative was, Jim.
Well, it was supply-side economics. It was the Reagan tax cuts at the state level. Art Laffer actually was hired by Governor Brownback to advise him on how to put all this together. But, I mean, essentially the idea was this, which is you cut income taxes dramatically, and you put us on a quote-unquote glide path to zero personal income tax, and you also then cut business taxes. And what will happen is jobs and industry and companies will just flock to Kansas because of the tax environment. And that was the notion behind it. A lot of other things were going on at the same time. That did not occur. And what happened was essentially in the first year or so of the tax cuts, revenues plummeted by roughly $900 million. And it seemed like after that happened, the state was in a constant budget crisis. One year after another, having to borrow money from the state employee retirement fund, delay payments to this, delay payments to that, just to keep the budget balanced. And so it was a pretty tough time, and the Governor Brownback kept saying, you just have to give it time. It won't succeed overnight. And yet it took long enough that in the 2016 election, Brownback was not on the ballot. But essentially, that policy was repudiated because a lot of the people who helped him pass in the legislature were defeated.
And did Kansas get back on its financial footing? Has it gotten back on its footing since then?
Yes. The tax cuts were essentially repealed, and Senator Boyer voted for the repeal. And Kansas is now back on firmer footing because those tax cuts were repealed, certainly one of the reasons, but the economy also just improved.
Julie is at the mic. Hey, Julie, what's on your mind?
Hi, Joshua. First, thank you for being here. I love your program and you inspire me. My question is specifically for Representative Williams. Is there a space in the Republican Party for women who are not interested in having a family?
Well, of course.
That's an interesting question. Would you just elaborate on that a bit in terms of women who are not interested in having a family? Elaborate on that a bit.
I guess sitting here listening to the conversation, we talked a lot about family and that it seems to kind of be a common thing with women in politics, but what do the women who want to be politically active, who don't have an interest in family, either party, where is that space for them? It's not personally me, but I have women in my life, and I think we're going to continue to go that way. Somebody brought up identity politics, and to me it kind of feels a little bit like that's what that is, especially moving forward.
Do you feel like that is too much of a focus on both sides of the aisle, primarily with Republicans? How do you see it?
Honestly, I would say more towards the GOP side.
Okay. All right, good question. Representative, what would you say?
I find that really interesting, and when I gave my example of why I became more conservative and I used the family as part of it, Senator Boyer didn't really like that because we all love our families, right? Or we should, and they're priority. So my comments about my personal experience should not detract from the senator's personal experience or anyone else's. Rather, whether or not you choose a family, I would say that is not relevant to a Republican or or a Democrat. We would love and embrace all women. The differences falls on where the views are, let's say on healthcare or taxes or education or infrastructure or social service funding and all of those items. That's where the breakdown actually occurs. But in terms of the single woman, the businesswoman, the woman that's trying to make it on her own, I think the Republican Party is the best place for you, because we are here to make a difference, to free you up, to reduce those regulations, to give you the freedom, and that's what we have to offer. We want to empower you to be the person that you're supposed to be, and I am not just a mom, I am a woman also, and a wife.
Representative Williams, if I could just follow on that, and then Senator, I'll let you answer. I think one of the other issues in terms of dealing with family is that there are many kinds of families, and I know a lot of millennials who may have a family that is comprised of 2 women, or like me, a family that is comprised of 2 men, who feel like the GOP doesn't respect their family or share their values. What would you say to them?
From a personal perspective, I would say that the GOP, your church, your neighborhood, any community that doesn't welcome you regardless of your particular values, that's not healthy. That does not mean that you have to agree. And I think that what's happening in US, Kansas, we're getting to a place where we are so partisan, so polar, that we're not okay if we disagree. Why can we not be respectful and make sure that all of your rights are maintained, but differ on the way that we view the world? Because in reality, we will. But if we cannot respect, then we are not doing a good job. And the GOP, as well as any party or organization, can do better, and I hope that we will.
Senator Boyer?
Well,
one second,
sorry.
Let me let the
Yes.
senator jump in and then I'll come
Yes.
back.
And what I would add, I mean, when asked, was there a straw that broke the camel's back? When the GOP put in their platform that God only made male and female, and we must work to eliminate transgender, my heart broke, and I was done.
So that was the final straw? Or that was the beginning of the...
That day, it hurt so much. And listening when gay marriage was approved and supported in the Supreme Court level, and I remember Republican colleagues saying, this is the end of civilization as we know it. And so those kinds of messages that were coming from my GOP colleagues hurt and took me to a place of I respect what you have to say, that we should be able to love one another, but I think we should all be able to, and all have the same rights, and all be able to participate in society equally. And when someone's putting a message in their platform that says, you can't be, I have a problem with that.
Before we keep going, Lacey is in the audience tonight. I know, Lacey, you wanted to share your story about elected office. While you're making your way to the mic, Jennifer, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, partly because about a year and a half ago, I think, I interviewed Caitlyn Jenner when her memoir came out, and I asked Caitlyn about her activities in conservative circles and in the GOP, and I asked, to just put it bluntly, like, do you feel like they really want you in that room? Like, are they talking to you? Are they talking to, and I put this to her, the ghost of Bruce Jenner? Right. Who are they really talking to? And what she said was, I am often the first and only trans person they will ever encounter, and if I'm not in the room, the conversation never happens, so I stay in the room. Now, I get that for Caitlyn Jenner. If that's the choice that she wants to make, that's her life. But that's a unique kind of choice. In terms of these social issues on which I think more and more, particularly young people, particularly women, as women have had to, through various waves of feminism, deal with cis women and trans women and so on, as that has progressed and doesn't seem to be going back, how does the party deal with that? It seems to be a social trend that's moving in one direction.
I think we have to remember that right here in Sedgwick County, the chairman of our GOP is gay. People want to not talk about that or brush it under the rug or not but that's the way it is, and he was elected right here in Sedgwick County. So the fact that we don't embrace or show respect to is simply not true. But you're right about the party piece. I think the platform piece. I think the other thing that's important to remember, a good chunk of the GOP is maybe not actively involved, but they are a little L libertarian, and they don't give two flips about somebody's sexuality. That is not reflected in the platform, but if you have conversations with so many folks in the GOP, they just like people. They don't care about what's going on behind closed doors.
Got a question from a libertarian in the audience that I want to get to in a minute, but first, Lacey is at the mic. Lacey, what's on your mind?
I'm really tall, so I'm going to have to pull this off of here.
That's just fine.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Oh, and Jim McLean, we're both from Parsons, Kansas, so we aren't one generation removed. We're just, go Vikings.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you so much. So, you know, as the first, as a woman who's been elected to the Sedgwick County Commission, the first woman in 10 years, thank you. And the first Democrat in 21 years, I was told that I was going to have to raise $100,000. And so as a woman who's stepping into this, I'm a musician who ran for office. I worked in healthcare, and you know what? I was told that it had to be done a certain way. And I think when you're a woman in politics and you've never done this before, everybody tells you it has to be done this way or that way. Well, you know what? I raised $28,000, and with the help of every single person almost in this room that I've seen tonight, I really appreciate it, because you know what? It doesn't have to be done the same way. And the reason why women don't run is because we're told it has to be done a certain way, and it doesn't. The second reason why women don't run is because we don't feel qualified, right? We feel like we have to have a law degree. We feel like we have to have some sort of education to run. That's not true. The other reason is because we have children, right? I'm a single mother raising 2 daughters on my own. I'm a single mom. The third reason is we don't see ourselves there. As a county commissioner, I only represent 12% of women sitting on a county commission in the state of Kansas out of 105 counties. So the problem is we aren't planting seeds in women's mind to run for office. That's the reason why I'm running, is because someone planted that seed. I didn't come up with it on my own.
Lacey, I appreciate you sharing your story. Could I just ask, you said you're a single mom raising 2 kids. I'm the son of a single mom, so I definitely give you a lot of credit for raising 2 kids. I'm basically 5 and 1. My mother will attest. Was there a moment for you when you just kind of had it, when the straw, broke the camel's back for you, and you said, you know what, I'm going to do this?
You know, in 2018, I was asked to be the MC for the Women's March here in town. And I was given a list of women who I was going to introduce. And as I sat at my computer and I researched all of them and the incredible things that they had done in this community, LaVonta Williams, 30-some plus years on this, in our community, other women in our community. And I thought to myself, as I'm introducing these women in front of 1,000 women, and my daughter, my 8-year-old daughter, is holding up a sign, "Hear our vote," I thought to myself, I am more than an MC and I am more than a musician.
Lacey, I appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you very much. We want time for a few more comments, including from a libertarian. I'm glad you mentioned libertarians, because Faith writes, as a member of a third party, libertarian, most often I must choose between R or D. How will you convince me, as a fiscally conservative, socially liberal Kansas woman, to choose a Republican candidate for office? Representative Williams and then Jennifer, would you mind responding to Faith?
I would say to Faith that if you choose a Republican, you're probably going to have more freedom to be socially whatever you want to be. You'll have more money in your pocket. You'll have more opportunity to make the choices that are right for you as an individual, or if you have a family, or if you're married. And that's the bottom line for my position, is that as a Republican conservative, I want to empower the individual to be able to make good decisions and to reap the benefits of those good decisions, whatever they may be, and to be able to take risks. Because I actually believe that when we strive and we struggle and we work for something rather than just perhaps it becomes an entitlement, we expect it, we anticipate it, we deserve it. Two different ways of thinking, and I think people in general, our character just blossoms when we have to work for it. So that's what I would say to Faith.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so she's kind of describing that classical liberal mentality, and you'll find that in the Republican Party. She's not alone. There are many folks who align that way. The more moderate thinking, like Barbara had described earlier. But again, it's just going to come down to who that candidate is that's in her district, and maybe she needs to reach out to us and talk about running for office.
Olivia is here tonight. She has a question about Generation Z. Olivia, if you would make your way to the mic. Senator Bollier, you represent a suburban district in the Kansas City metro area. You switched parties after being elected as a Republican. Now you're running for re-election as a Democrat. How does that affect your strategy for re-election? Are you approaching it differently? Do you foresee needing to convince different groups of people or changing your strategy? How are you approaching it this time?
Not differently. I've always approached it the same way. I'm a doctor. I care about people. I listen. I move forward and make decisions and find results. So my constituents, I had people vote for me from all sides and no sides. They liked me because I was an independent voice and didn't just vote party lines. And so nothing's really changed. Now, people see me, I mean, I have a different letter by the end of my name, but the people, I will be contacting more people, but I always went to as many doors as I could, no matter what party they were in or even no party. To me, it's just representing the people.
Jim, it's worth noting that the senator was not the only lawmaker from the Kansas City metro to switch parties. Tell us a bit more about what's going on in those suburbs and how that kind of compares to what we see in the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think Johnson County reflects what we see in suburban communities across the country. Senator Bollier changed parties, Senator Dinah Sykes did as well, and Representative Stephanie Clayton all switched at roughly the same time. And I was curious, I remember talking to Dinah Sykes about this as to how much pushback you got immediately. Do you remember any? No?
No.
Okay. But I
mean, there's a little, but I'd love to show you the box of letters I got from all over the country and the hundreds of emails from people just saying thank you for standing up with a voice. Not about party, but about people. That's what I heard.
But going back to my discussions with Patrick Miller, who's the political scientist at KU, who really studies these districts in depth, he will say that all three of these people got out ahead of the political trend in their county. It was changing from a partisan standpoint, and it was good politics for them to change parties.
Jim, to that note, let me tag on one question from Carl, and then Jennifer, I'd like you to answer this as well. To that point, Carl asks, for many years, Kansas led the nation on social policies. How do you keep the national parties from trying to influence our statewide policies? Jim, how do you see the relationship between the national party and what goes on in Kansas?
It's getting harder and harder. When you're in Topeka for any length of time, what you hear often is that the politics of Washington have descended on Topeka. The partisanship is more extreme, the polarization is more extreme, and these political trends that we're discussing the connection points between Kansas politics and national politics, and that's true also in the policy sense. And so I think it's just getting harder and harder and harder for states to kind of go it alone and be distinct in the way that Kansas once was. It's just the politics of the country have just kind of subsumed states in that way, I think.
Jennifer?
Back to when we were discussing the three and then counting Joy Costin, four that became Democrats.
Right.
I don't know about the rest of the Republicans. I just wasn't really surprised. There was no shock in Barbara becoming a Democrat or Joy or Stephanie. They tended to, in my view, align more so with the other side anyway.
When I interviewed Dan Hawkins, who was the majority leader,
he said, relief to you.
When I interviewed Dan Hawkins, he said they're probably where they need to be.
Yeah, I would never say that in a sarcastic manner. I don't know what his tone was, but it seemed sensible. I don't think anyone was surprised.
Olivia is here at the mic. Olivia, what's on your mind?
Yeah,
Yeah, so we've already addressed millennials, but millennials are 100% within voting age. And we're coming up on Gen Z being the newest growing population of voters. I'm 21 and I am Gen Z, and I'm about to graduate college and head into the workforce. And so Gen Z grew up during the recession and is showing an even stronger interest in this socialism that we've discussed before, and in income inequality specifically. They're also a large part of this new rise of young people's political engagement. So have conversations begun about how to bring them into the GOP and how to bring them into either party, really?
Before I let Representative Williams, if you wouldn't mind responding to that, what have you seen, Olivia? Do you feel like you're being engaged with, spoken to, or maybe spoken down to? What have you encountered?
I think that a lot of the conversation just hasn't included Generation Z yet. I think that there's so much discussion about millennials, and we've talked about how millennials are this new thing that people are talking about when they probably should have been talked about for a long time. And Generation Z is this large group of people. When you look at the March for Our Lives, is a large group of Generation Z coming forward who will be voting. And
Since we're speaking about
yes.
women in politics in the GOP, Gen Z women, how do you see, and I'm not asking you to speak for every Gen Z woman in the country, but in your circle among the people you know, how do the women your age view Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Independents? Like, do those parties matter? Do they have good reputations, bad reputations, no reputations?
I think that it's kind of an interesting thing because we are growing up in this time when things are so partisan and so split that I think that there's not very many people in Generation Z who are in the middle. And I think that it's really either edge, and then there are a couple people who are in the middle, but it's really, really, what's the word?
Separate.
Polarized, thank you. And so I think that there are definitely people who are super to the left and super to the right, but I think that there are people in the middle who are just completely ignored.
So there are people, they kind of feel like there's this hard gravitational pull where they have to pick a side and there's nothing in the middle. Okay. Yes. Olivia, thank you for sharing that. Representative Williams, what would you say to Olivia?
I would love to, Olivia. This is such a fun topic for me because I'm a mom of two Gen Z women, and they both can vote. One's 18 and one's 21, both of them at the University of Kansas, and a son and a daughter that are also Gen Z, I guess. I didn't know what that was for sure. But, but let me tell you what, our house is kind of an interesting place to be because I'm more conservative and my husband's just a little bit more moderate than I am. So our kids, we debate. We talk about the issues, we talk about the people, we talk about President Trump, we talk about things that happen in the State House, and they get a front-hand opportunity to be part of that discussion. And we really encourage them to get into the parades, to learn about it, and two of our kids were involved in debate. Whenever I have an opportunity to go to one of my schools and talk to a government class, I get super excited, and I have to admit that I really try to pick on the girls, trying to encourage them to find themselves and to have their voice, because I think that's pretty darn important. And also, when they come up to the Capitol, engaging them. I'm so excited when they do want to know more and they do want to engage. And I think that we need to look for more opportunities to engage Generation Z. I'm still learning, actually.
Glad to know. You said two of them were in debate?
Yes, two in debate.
I was a debate nerd too.
Yeah.
Any fellow debate nerds out there?
They're all twirling their pens.
Okay, right, exactly. Twirling their pens like a weapon, ready to strike. Just.
But can I say that it's really important for Gen Z to have ears for both, because once you start paying taxes and once you start seeing what's happening behind the scenes, sometimes your views may shift. Because in the reality, when I was in college, I was all about how can you make my college tuition cheaper, and these things that I didn't realize somebody does have to pay for that. So let's be honest about the conversation and realize that no matter what we get into, whether it's healthcare or education, there is a cost. Nothing is free, and as long as there is an honest debate and Gen Z have an opportunity to discuss.
Senator?
What I would add is that pay attention to who listens to you and is hearing you. I heard you mention March for Our Lives. I was there. And one of the reasons that I have been pulled much more and into the Democratic side of things is because we're willing to talk and listen to people saying, We're tired of gun violence. I'm hearing that. And so what it is that matters to you is going to change. You just over time, my needs are changing. I'm getting older. I'm looking at Medicare ultimately. And it makes a difference what's in front of you in your life. But for a political group, you need to associate with somebody. And it may be no party, but you being together in collective to get to the votes that you need, as Christy said earlier, pushing red or green, it takes a certain number, 51%, 50%. You've got to have the majority to get something moved through. So when you associate with the group, the quickest way to get there is with two groups, and one of them will win. So finding out who will listen to what it is that you need and you want moved forward and joining with them, who will listen to you, is where I would suggest you go.
Let me, thank you, Olivia, appreciate it. Let me zoom out just a little bit and talk nationally as well. I'm glad we were able to start by focusing on Kansas. We had the question about how Washington is affecting Kansas. Jim, let me start with you, although I'd like everybody's perspective on this, on the impact of the Trump administration, the shift of the Republican Party, at least inside the Beltway in DC, kind of coalescing around him, pulling the party, some would argue further to the right, certainly others would argue kind of putting fear in lawmakers for fear of opposing him. Jim, how have you seen that play out in Kansas? I'd love to hear everybody's perspectives on that, but Jim, let me start with you.
Well, it's interesting because I'm not sure exactly how it's playing out other than anecdotal conversations. I mean, it's all anything. Anybody who's interested in politics, it's what they're talking about. I'm not sure President Trump is pulling the party to the right. I think he's pulling it into a completely new direction. I'm not even sure it's ideologically based. But that aside, and I don't say that to get. It's not a laugh line. I just think it's demonstrably true. I mean, he's just not an orthodox political figure. But it's interesting, I think, to watch the state's congressional delegation. Every now and then, Senator Jerry Moran is a Republican senator from Kansas, and he's a conservative, but he's also, to some degree, independent, and every now and then you have seen him vote contrary to the president, particularly on foreign affairs issues. And I've written some stories about that. Other members of the congressional delegation, pretty much the House delegation, aside from Sharice Davids, the Democrat in the 3rd District, have just been in lockstep with the president and defending him at every turn. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in 2020, whether anybody will benefit from that or pay a price for that. Kansas, of course, went pretty heavily for President Trump. But again, I would really like to go to some of those districts across the state where the vote for President Trump was the heaviest, and just have some conversations with people to see how they react to that. I honestly don't know at this point.
Jennifer?
So, as I go out and recruit candidates and talk to women, it's like there's the thought that we must hate President Trump because we're women and look at all of the horrible and awful things that he said or fill in the blank. But Republican women don't really appreciate being forced into a box and being told you must hate President Trump. I think we look at least I do, from a logic perspective, less from the emotional side, and part of that's just my makeup, but I look at my investment portfolio. My teenage son has found a job, wages are up, the embassy was moved to Jerusalem, abortion rates are at an all-time low, crime is plummeting, and I don't look at Twitter, and overall I'm just pretty dang happy. So what I find when I go out and talk to a lot of these women, as I'm recruiting, especially in relationship to the president, they're not always looking at it from that emotional side and all of the drama that comes with Twitter. They're looking at policy.
Would you still feel that way if you did look more at Twitter?
How would I know?
Well, but I'm saying, I mean, there are quite a few Republicans who have said they've had to hold their nose and throw their phone in the toilet, not to look at what the president has tweeted to maintain that support.
Some of that comes from our interest, too, in Supreme Court justices and other elements that factor into that. But speaking about myself personally and other women that I do speak to that aren't super emotional about the whole thing, and we truly do look at it from a logical, fact-based stance, I
I hate to say this because it's going to be taken out of context, but all of the tweets and the emotion and the drama, it doesn't matter to me as much as him accomplishing what he said he was going to do, and he's done that.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. You're focusing more on kind of the policy agenda and what's gotten done in the administration.
The tweets aside,
before I come to you, Representative.
The tweets aside, I mean, a lot of, and I use this term advisedly, but a lot of apologists for the president always refer to the tweets saying, well, what are you going to do, right? What I'm interested, everybody up at this table is interested in politics, in government, and in institutions functioning properly, whether you're a conservative or a moderate or a liberal. You want these institutions that we value to function. The question I would have for people who say, you know, that Trump has delivered results in terms of the economy is, what about the damage being done to institutions in this country that need to survive past this presidency?
To Representative Williams, by way of answering that.
And maybe I'm thin-skinned because I'm a journalist, but I don't appreciate being denigrated, you know, and being assumptions being made about, you know, my level of professionalism.
I just don't think it was a surprise.
Let me let the representative get to that one, and I would add to that also the idea, you know, before the election and during the election, progressives and Democrats were asking women across the country, how can you vote for a guy who said that by dint of his wealth and his power that he had permission to grab women in their private parts? How can he get your vote? How do you see the impact? How do you see the impact of President Trump on the party, particularly in Kansas, including just some of the vile things that he said about women?
All right, so I think that for me, for being a Republican and where my vote goes, number one, the most important thing is that the freedom and opportunity is passed on generation after generation, and that is supreme. With that also is life. That matters to me. That's something that I value, and so when I choose a person that I'm going to vote for, it's going to be someone that preserves life. And that is very, very important. Now, on the honesty issue, I'm not going to defend our president on many of the things that he's done. I think that they're despicable, and those are discussions we've had with our kids in our home. But when I had to make a choice about freedom and opportunity and the cost of what the promises are. And when I say promises, we cannot tell a new generation that are coming up that everything is free, that you can have free health care, you can have free college tuition, you can have your loans forgiven, that you should have the same pay as somebody else. That to me is not freedom. When you have to buy or promise things that somebody has the power to go get themselves, and I believe that that is the most important. So that's why I choose to vote the way that I do, and that precedes some of the other issues.
Brooke is here in the audience. You have a question that you'd like to share on mic. If by way of making yourself, if you would just make your way up to the mic. Before I get to you, Senator, I'm harping on this, Representative, and I know I am. But if all of those things politically come to pass for the sake of yourself, your family, your community, and we re-elect a president who thinks it's okay to grab women in their private parts, was it worth it?
Well, first of all, I don't think that he thinks it's okay. I think he... I honestly think that he makes some bad decisions, and they're evident, but I don't think anyone in this room has not made some bad decisions. But when I said it comes back to freedom, opportunity, and honesty about what we're going to do. And I'm not talking about his words, I'm talking about our words as politicians when we make promises that we cannot possibly maintain. I cannot possibly tell somebody that's 65 that you're going to be able to pay, you're going to have your full retirement, and I'm able to increase your retirement, and I'm going to be able to pay for you in every medical procedure, and I'm also going to be able to increase entitlements on the other end as well. That's dishonest. And I also come back to the very key point, and that is life. You cannot take away how important that issue is. And President Trump stands very strongly on that issue, and I cannot minimize that. And so though I cannot agree with with his personal behavior. I cannot agree with the former President Clinton's behavior either. And I cannot agree with many other moral positions that other lawmakers and presidents have had. So I guess we all choose the lesser of two evils, but for me, again, it's freedom, opportunity, honesty for the future, and life.
Before I let the senator answer, we're about 10 minutes from the end of the taping. Do not break my winning streak, please. I'm serious. We're batting 1,000. Please. We agreed. Senator?
When I look at the facts, the deficit is at the highest point it's ever been in history. And so I'm struggling to see how the vote for this president made it better. The gap between what workers make and what the CEO makes is tremendous, hundreds of thousands of times different. So when I hear people, it's kitchen table issues that they care about. How big that pile of bills is getting. Can I pay for my daughter to have her tonsillectomy or not? Or whatever else it is. Can I afford to buy the insulin that I need? Or do I have to split it in half and not even really treat what's going on? So what people are saying they voted for, I'm not seeing in reality. What I am seeing is people fighting and fighting and fighting. And be it Republican or Democrat, let's do better than that. We can do better than that. That's where I think women help. We're here to talk about women. We don't like fighting. I'm not saying all women don't. I've seen some that I've worked with that really like discord, but most of us don't, and we're willing to come to the table. So looking at the facts, looking at what really is happening, and helping people live their everyday life in a way that celebrates their ability to earn their living and do what they need to do is what's important.
Brooke is at the mic. Brooke, what's on your mind?
I'm a little bit nervous, honestly.
Oh, that's okay.
I think that as a woman and as a millennial, it's a little bit hard to get up here and to voice my opinion. I feel often that it's not heard, so I'm glad to be here. It seems that there is constantly a box that people are putting us into, specifically my two groups, a woman and a millennial. It seems like Democrats are constantly saying they want you to be a strong, independent woman, a working mom, pro-LGBTQ, and Republicans are constantly saying, be a mom, be a stay-at-home mom, be a wife, and be anti-gay or whatever. It seems like, Jim, you said earlier that, what Joshua said, 50% of the population aren't really picking a side at this point. You said that's not true. They are leaning towards a side. But what if we're not? What if we're not leaning towards a side? What if we constantly feel like we're picking the lesser of two evils and we don't want to? What if we don't want this evil or that evil? What if we want someone who actually represents us and is what we want and is representing us?
Brooke, before I let the panel respond to that, first of all, I think you are kind of like the golden voter that both parties would give their eye teeth for, because you're that person in the middle. Like, you're that 50% that sooner or later, when general elections come around, they need you to win. Like, they can't win with just their base. How, you clearly feel like you're kind of a person without a party at this point. Do you want to find a party that kind of works for you as a woman, as a millennial, etc.? Are you cool being an independent? Like, what do you want? What would you prefer?
I would love to be represented. I would love to hear someone say things in a big way that actually mean something to me and that I actually feel like I can get on board with. I don't think that, I get tired of just the petty arguments, that the fact that is that we constantly argue over the same topics and they're just so far away from each other. Like, how can we find a middle ground? How can we support something that is something that we feel like isn't on polar right or polar left?
Mm-hmm. I think this might be a good one for you, Jennifer, partly because a lot of what I think, Brooke, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think a lot of what turns you off is what you see come out of DC and what you see kind of on television of all the partisan kind of rancor and backbiting and infighting. And I would guess that's part of what kind of is contributing to all of this to an extent.
Even here today.
Yeah.
Well, I hear that. And Jennifer, I wonder how you would respond to Brooke, especially because...
I just want to, sorry, go ahead.
Well, just especially because on certain governmental levels, like I said, state governments, county commissions, city councils, there are certain things that you just have to get done every year. So it's almost like the clock is set more rigidly at lower levels of government to stop arguing and pass something as opposed to, say, on Capitol Hill.
Well, I just want to applaud you for being thoughtful, that you're actually taking time to ponder that there are two sides of this and thinking about where you fit into it, and maybe not just doing what your grandparents did or what your parents did or what a teacher said to you, but you're actually taking time to think about the issues, and I cannot applaud you strongly enough for that. I'll say too, what I kind of started out earlier saying is identity politics drive me crazy. Just because we're women doesn't mean we have to think XYZ, or just because I am a conservative shouldn't mean that I have to think, fill in the blanks, whatever. You're right about that. You figure out what fits for you, what works for you, and that's the path that you go. And I'll tell you too, the whole millennial thing, every generation has said that about the generation before.
Yeah.
I think about my parents, I'm sure about my generation, oh my word, we've gone to hell in a handbasket. And every generation has said that about the one before, so don't take it too personally.
Brooke,
I would encourage you though, to find folks that you can align with or connect with, and just start going to things. Go to different events here in town. Go to both sides of the aisle. Go and listen. It'll help you kind of flesh out what you really believe to be true.
They're going to love you. I'm telling you, Brooke, you're going to walk in the door, you will be the most important person in that room. Thank you for sharing your question, Brooke. Appreciate it. We're winding down, but I do want to hear from the senator and the representative. And if you would just speak to women who may be listening to this in other parts of the country, who might be thinking about running for office regardless of their party or no party, who are thinking about it regardless of what their reasons are for getting in the race, for possibly not getting in the race, their personal factors, their politics. What do you wish more women understood about running for office and being in office that might help them make that decision in terms of whether to throw their hat in the ring? Senator?
I love this question, thank you. Because for whatever reason, women always are putting this list together in their head about, well, do I know enough? Can I do this right? Can I do whatever?
Raise money.
And all, they have these lists, and maybe that's because that's how we run our households, and we've got to do everything. We're the ones that take charge. But ultimately, a man goes, gosh, I want to be a senator. I think I'll run. And they go do it. And so encouraging women to know that they have every ability that anybody else has, and that come and visit, because you'll find out maybe you even know more than many of us. and that's the whole point of a citizen legislature. We don't want everybody to be the same.
Right.
We want a wide variety of ages and sexes and educations and whatever, so that we represent the people and can do what they need. So women, go for it. And we're here to support you, and believe in yourselves, because you are good enough. In fact, you might be even better.
And Representative, I'll give you the last word.
Okay. What I would tell women is that just find something that you can concentrate on. You cannot fix everything. Have you ever seen someone that had 5 jobs or volunteered at every organization? You cannot do or be effective if you try to be all things to all people. Find the thing that you're passionate about, the last speaker. Find some issue that you care about and really try to move mountains in that issue. Be the expert in that issue, whatever that may be. Stay in that wheelhouse. Don't jump around to another really awesome big issue. Maybe let somebody else carry carry that torch. The other thing I would say to women is I hope you develop the thick skin, because you will be criticized and you will be misunderstood. Because remember, as we even have this conversation, it's more one-sided than it is two-sided. You get to hear us, you get to ask a few questions, but you can't really know what's our motive, what's our heart, what's our thinking, what have we done, what do we want to do. In the few minutes that we have to respond, we can only give you a tiny taste of what our vision is or what we care about. So if at any point myself or anyone here came off in a way that seems unauthentic or uncaring, I can speak for myself. That is not intended, and I hope I'd have the opportunity to get to know you at a later time. Thank you.
We have had some fantastic engagement. Thanks to all of you who sent speaker cards in, and thanks also to Representative Christy Williams, a Republican representing District 77 east of Wichita. Representative Williams, thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
Senator Barbara Bollier, a Democrat in District 7 in the Kansas City metro area. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Jim McLean, the senior political reporter for the Kansas News Service. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Fun.
And Jennifer Basinger, Vice President of Political Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Jennifer. This conversation was produced by 1A's Amanda Williams and KMUW's Sarah Jane Crespo and Haley Krausen. Special thanks to KMUW staff for hosting us this week. 1A Across America is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. You can catch lively discussions at KMUW's Engage ICT Democracy on Tap every month. On November 5th, they'll be talking about mental health. This program comes to you from WAMU, part of American University in Washington, distributed by NPR. We will be back in Wichita next year, but until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you so much for listening. This is 1A.